My landlady said we needed boundaries, but the way she looked at me said something else entirely. I'd lived in her building long enough that the place felt ordinary, almost invisible. The narrow hallway with its scuffed paint, the soft echo of footsteps, the way the afternoon light always slipped through the window at the end and settled into a pale rectangle on the floor. It was all familiar, safe, and so was she. At least, that's what I'd always told myself. She was my landlady, early 40s, calm in a way that didn't ask for attention. She dressed simply, comfortably, nothing flashy, but there was a quiet confidence in the way she carried herself, like she knew exactly who she was and didn't feel the need to explain it. When we spoke, it was usually brief. Rent, repairs, small, easy conversations that never lingered long enough to mean anything. Until lately, that afternoon, she'd asked me to come by to talk about something minor, or at least that's how she framed it. The door to her apartment was already open when I arrived. Warm air drifted out, carrying the faint scent of clean fabric and something herbal, maybe tea. Felt lived in, thoughtful, not the kind of space you rush through. "Come in," she said, stepping aside. Our shoulders brushed as I passed her, accidental and light, but it stayed with me longer than it should have. I noticed how she paused before closing the door, hand resting on the knob for half a second too long. The click when it shut sounded louder than usual, final in a way I couldn't explain. I stood there awkwardly, unsure where to put my hands, while she moved deeper into the room. She was relaxed but not careless. There was a new carefulness in her movements, like she was measuring the space between us without looking directly at it. "Have a seat," she said, nodding toward the couch. I did, perching on the edge the way you do when you expect a short conversation. She remained standing for a moment, arms loosely folded, eyes drifting toward the window instead of me. The light caught the side of her face, softening her expression, and for a brief second, she looked thoughtful, almost vulnerable. I told myself I was reading too much into it. Still, something felt different. Not dramatic, not obvious, just a subtle shift, like the air before a storm that never quite arrives. Our conversations had been lasting longer lately, our eye contact lingering, small silences settling comfortably instead of being rushed away. I hadn't questioned it. I hadn't allowed myself to, because she was my landlady, because she was older, because some lines weren't meant to be crossed, even imagined. But as I sat there in her living room, the door closed behind us, the quiet stretching between her breaths and mine, I had the uneasy sense that the familiarity I relied on had already changed. And whatever this conversation was about, it wasn't going to be as simple as I hoped. She didn't sit right away. Instead, she stayed standing near the arm of the couch, one hand resting lightly against the back of it, the other folded at her side like she wasn't sure what to do with it yet. I noticed that before anything else. The hesitation, the way she took a small breath, then another, as if she were choosing each word carefully before letting it exist. "We need to talk," she said. Her voice was calm, not sharp, not cold, but there was something in it that made my stomach tighten anyway. The kind of tone that tells you a conversation has already been rehearsed in someone's head, maybe more than once. I nodded, even though I wasn't sure what I was agreeing to. She glanced at me, then away again, eyes landing on the window, the bookshelf, anywhere but my face. It wasn't avoidance exactly, felt more like restraint, like she was holding something steady inside herself and didn't want it to spill out too fast. "It's nothing bad," she added quickly. I think it's better if we're honest." Honest. The word landed heavier than it should have. I shifted on the couch, suddenly aware of how close we were. Close enough to feel the warmth of her presence, to hear the subtle change in her breathing. My hands rested on my knees, fingers loosely interlaced, grounding myself in the moment. She finally sat down, but not all the way back. Just enough to be settled. There was space between us, intentional, measured, but it felt thinner than before. "I've noticed things," she said carefully. "Little things." Her fingers moved as she spoke, tracing absent lines along the cushion, then stopping as if she'd caught herself doing it. She pressed her palms together instead. I didn't interrupt. I didn't trust my voice yet. She cleared her throat softly. The conversations. How long they've been getting. How easy it feels to talk to you. She paused again, and this time her eyes came back to mine. Not searching. Not accusing. Just honest. I don't want there to be any confusion, she continued. For either of us. Confusion. The word echoed in my chest. I wondered if she could see it on my face. The way something inside me tightened, then softened. I'd spent weeks telling myself that the warmth I felt around her was one-sided. Convenient. Harmless. Something I could explain away if I tried hard enough. But the way she was speaking now, slow, deliberate, careful with every breath, told me she'd been feeling it too. I respect you, she said quietly, and I value the kind of dynamic we have. That's why I think it's important we set some boundaries. There it was. Not said like a warning, not like a rejection, more like a confession wrapped in responsibility. I nodded again, forcing myself to meet her eyes this time. I understand, I said, and I meant it. But understanding didn't make the room feel any less heavy. It didn't erase the tension humming softly beneath her words. If anything, it made it clearer. Because this wasn't a conversation you had when nothing was happening. This was the kind you had when something already was. For a moment after she finished speaking, neither of us moved. The room held its breath. Even the distant sounds from outside seemed to fade, like the world had politely stepped back to give us space. I could hear the quiet tick of a clock somewhere behind her, steady and patient, marking time we weren't sure how to use yet. She broke the silence first. I didn't bring this up to make you uncomfortable, she said, her voice softer now, almost tentative. And I'm not assuming anything about your intentions. She turned slightly toward me as she spoke, not closing the distance, but not pulling away either. Her posture was open, vulnerable in a way that surprised me. This wasn't authority or control, it was honesty. I just realized, she paused, searching for the right words, that I've started to look forward to seeing you more than I probably should. The admission hung between us, fragile and unguarded. I felt a slow warmth spread through my chest, followed almost immediately by a rush of uncertainty. Part of me wanted to look away, to give her space to take it back. Another part of me felt strangely relieved, like something I'd been carrying quietly had finally been named. I wasn't sure if it was just me, she continued, or if I was reading too much into things. Her eyes lifted to mine then, steady but cautious, as if bracing for impact. I swallowed. My throat felt tight, but not with fear, with recognition. I felt it too, I said finally, my voice low, careful. I just didn't think it was my place to say anything. Her lips curved into the smallest smile. Not amused, not flirtatious. More like grateful, like she'd been holding her breath and could finally let it out. That's what I thought, she said quietly. A gentle laugh slipped out of her then, surprising both of us. It wasn't loud or polished. It was soft, human, edged with nerves. I found myself smiling back before I could stop it. We sat there like that for a moment, sharing something unspoken but deeply understood. Our knees were close now, close enough that I could feel the warmth through the space between us. Neither of us moved to change it. I want to be clear, she said after a while. This isn't about blame or expectations. She rested her hands in her lap, fingers loosely intertwined. It's about awareness. I didn't want to pretend I wasn't feeling something when I was. I nodded, appreciating the care in her words, the respect. She wasn't asking for anything. She wasn't taking anything away either. I appreciate you saying it, I replied. Honestly, I think I was trying to convince myself it would pass if I ignored it. She met my gaze again, and this time there was no hesitation, just understanding. Sometimes, she said gently, naming something is enough. The quiet settled back in, but it felt different now. Lighter, not empty, just calm. The tension hadn't disappeared, but it had softened, reshaped into something steadier. What surprised me most wasn't the attraction itself. It was the trust, the way we'd met each other in that moment. Not as landlady and tenant, not as assumptions or roles, but simply as two people acknowledging a connection neither of us had planned for. And somehow, that honesty made the space between us feel both safer and more alive than ever. She was quiet for a moment after that, her gaze dropping to her hands as if they held the rest of the story. When she finally spoke again, her voice was steady, but it carried a different weight now. Less careful, more real. When I talk about boundaries, she said, I'm not talking about rules. She shifted slightly on the couch, angling her body just enough that she wasn't facing me directly. Felt intentional. A way to give herself room to say something difficult without feeling watched too closely. I've learned the hard way that blurred lines don't stay small, she continued. They start with good intentions, comfort, connection, and then suddenly you're in something you didn't fully choose, because you never stopped to ask if you should. Her words weren't bitter. They were reflective, the kind that come from experience you've already made peace with, but haven't forgotten. I listened without interrupting, my attention fixed not just on what she was saying, but on how she said it. The slight pause before certain words. The way her shoulders rose and fell when she took a breath, like she was steadying herself. I've spent a lot of time rebuilding my sense of calm, she said softly. My life, my space. She glanced around the room briefly, as if the walls themselves were part of that process. I don't want to lose that, not for something confusing, even if it feels nice. Nice wasn't the right word, and I think we both knew it. But she used it anyway, maybe because it felt safer. I nodded slowly. That makes sense. It wasn't a clever response. It wasn't romantic. But it was honest. And it seemed to matter. She looked at me then, really looked at me, and something in her expression softened. You're easy to talk to, she said. And that's rare, especially for me. The admission felt intimate in a way that surprised me more than any touch could have. I felt a quiet responsibility settle in my chest. Not heavy, but real. I don't want you to feel like you have to guard yourself around me, I said carefully. But I also don't want to be something that disrupts your peace. For a moment, she didn't respond. Her eyes searched mine, as if weighing the sincerity of my words. Then she let out a small, relieved breath. That's exactly why I wanted to have this conversation, she said. Because you don't make me feel reckless. You make me feel seen. The space between us felt charged again, but differently now. Calmer, grounded. Our hands rested close on the cushion between us. Not touching, but aware of each other's presence. The restraint itself felt intimate, like a mutual agreement made without being spoken aloud. I'm not asking you to disappear, she added gently, or to change how you are. She smiled faintly. I just need us to move slowly, with intention. I met her gaze and nodded. I can do that. And in that moment, I realized something quietly important. The boundary she was setting wasn't a barrier meant to keep me out. It was an invitation to stay carefully, honestly, and with respect for everything she had worked to protect. The conversation should have ended there. It felt complete somehow, like we'd said the important things, named what needed naming, and given it a place to rest. She shifted forward on the couch, a subtle signal that she was about to stand, to close the space and return us gently to normal. But she didn't move right away. Neither did I. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was dense, full, the kind that hums quietly, pressing in on you, asking to be noticed. I became acutely aware of the room again, the muted light, the soft fabric beneath my hands, the faint rhythm of her breathing beside me. She stood first, smoothing her hands down the front of her sweater, a small, grounding gesture. I followed a second later, feeling the shift in my chest as we rose into the same shared space, closer now without intending to be. Well, she said softly, offering a small smile. Thank you for listening. Her voice carried relief, but there was something else there too. A trace of vulnerability she hadn't fully tucked away yet. I meant what I said, I replied, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. About respecting you. About not wanting to complicate things. She nodded, eyes lingering on mine. I know. We stood there for a moment longer than necessary, neither of us reaching for the door. The space between us felt thinner now, charged in a way that made me conscious of every movement, every breath. "I just want you to know," I added quietly, choosing my words with care. "This conversation didn't push me away. If anything, it made me appreciate you more." Her expression changed then, just slightly. The careful composure softened, replaced by something warmer, more open. She looked down briefly, then back up as if steadying herself. "I'm glad," she said. "I was hoping it would." She hesitated, then stepped forward. Not close enough to overwhelm, just enough to bridge the gap we'd been circling around all evening. "Can I?" she asked, gesturing gently between us. I nodded before she finished the question. The hug was brief, careful, but it held more meaning than I expected. Her arms wrapped lightly around my shoulders, her cheek resting near my collarbone. I could feel the warmth of her, the quiet steadiness of her body, the subtle rise and fall of her breath. For a split second, the world narrowed to that feeling. Then she pulled back, slowly, deliberately, as if reminding both of us where the line was, and why it mattered. Her hand lingered on my arm for a moment longer than necessary, fingers warm through the fabric of my sleeve. When she finally let go, the absence felt louder than the touch itself. "Take care," she said softly. "You too," I replied. As I reached for the door, I glanced back at her. She was watching me with a small, knowing smile. Not regretful, not uncertain, just present. The door closed gently behind me, and as I stepped back into the hallway, heart still steady but full, I realized something important. Restraint didn't make the moment weaker. If anything, it made it unforgettable. The days after that conversation felt quieter, but not emptier. If anything, they carried a new kind of awareness. The kind that makes you notice small things more sharply, even when nothing outward has changed. I still passed her in the hallway, still exchanged polite greetings, still lived my routine as if everything were exactly the same. But it wasn't. The first time I saw her again, she smiled at me in a way that felt different, less guarded, more intentional. It wasn't the warm, automatic friendliness I'd grown used to. It was softer, slower, like she was choosing the moment rather than falling into it. "Hey," she said. "Hey," I replied. That was it. No long conversation, no lingering. And yet, as I walked away, I felt steadier than I had in days. Later that week, she texted me about something small, an update on a repair request. Practical, neutral, exactly what you'd expect between a landlady and tenant. And still, the message ended with, "Hope you're doing well." It shouldn't have meant anything, but it did. I realized then that boundaries didn't erase warmth. They just reshaped it, gave it clearer edges, a place to exist without spilling over into confusion. When we spoke again in person, it was brief. We stood near the stairwell, the late afternoon light filtering in through the window. She mentioned being busy lately. I nodded, told her I'd been the same. "I'm glad we talked," she said after a moment. "So am I," I replied. She held my gaze then, steady and calm. "I was worried things might feel awkward after." "They don't," I said honestly. "They feel clearer." Her shoulders relaxed at that. Just a little. "Good." There was a pause, comfortable, unforced. The kind you don't rush to fill. We stood there, sharing the space without trying to claim it. "I want you to know," she added quietly. "I meant what I said about moving slowly. That doesn't mean pretending nothing's there." She smiled faintly. "It just means respecting it." I nodded. "I can do that." And I realized something then, something important. This wasn't a waiting game. It wasn't a test of patience or a denial of feeling. It was a mutual decision to let things unfold honestly, without pressure to define them too quickly. When we parted, she touched my shoulder lightly. A brief, grounding gesture. Friendly, warm, intentional. It lingered in my awareness long after she turned away. As I walked back to my apartment, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. Not because I had answers, but because I had clarity. Whatever this was, whatever it might become, it wasn't something we were running from anymore. We were simply choosing to be present. And for now, that felt like enough. Time didn't rush us after that. If anything, it slowed down. Weeks passed, marked not by grand moments but by small, steady ones. Passing each other in the hallway. Brief conversations that didn't need an excuse anymore. A shared understanding that lived comfortably between words. Nothing was hidden now and nothing was forced. She kept her boundaries. So did I. But within those lines, something gentle continued to grow. One evening, I ran into her by the front door as she was locking up. She looked tired in an honest way, hair loosely pulled back, coat draped over her arm instead of worn. When she noticed me, her expression softened immediately. "Long day?" I asked. She smiled. "You have no idea." Without thinking too much about it, I opened the door for her. She paused, glanced at me, then stepped closer instead of past me. "Do you want to walk for a bit?" she asked. "Just around the block." It was simple, unloaded, safe. We walked side by side, the evening air cool and calm, the streetlights flickering on one by one. Our arms brushed occasionally, unintentional but familiar now. Neither of us pulled away. "I've been thinking," she said after a while, "about how easy things feel lately." I nodded. "Me too." She stopped walking, turning toward me fully this time. "I don't know what this is going to look like," she said honestly. "And I'm not ready to promise anything I can't be sure about." "I wouldn't want you to," I replied. She studied my face, searching for hesitation. When she didn't find it, she relaxed. "But," she continued, "I do know I don't want to pretend this connection doesn't exist, and I don't want to lose it either." Something warm settled in my chest. Not the rush of certainty, but the steadiness of being chosen without pressure. "I'm not asking for a timeline," I said, "or labels. I just want to keep showing up the way we have been." She smiled then, not cautiously, not nervously, just openly. "That sounds right." She reached out, her hand finding mine naturally this time. No hesitation, no checking herself. Her fingers curled around mine, warm and steady, like she decided something quietly and didn't need to announce it. We stood there like that for a moment, the street quiet around us, the future undefined but no longer intimidating. When we eventually headed back, we didn't rush. At the door to the building, she squeezed my hand gently before letting go. "Thank you," she said, "for being patient and kind." "Thank you," I replied, "for trusting me." As I watched her walk ahead, keys in hand, I realized something important. Not every love story begins with certainty. Some begin with respect, with honesty, with two people choosing care over impulse. And maybe we didn't know exactly where this would lead. But for the first time, we were walking in the same direction, together, aware and unafraid to take it one honest step at a time. If this story of quiet tension, heartfelt confessions, and unexpected connection moved you, don't forget to hit like and subscribe to follow more age gap romances and slow burn love stories. Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever experienced a connection that felt impossible but unforgettable? Your story might inspire the next one we tell.